Hello and welcome to another check-in episode for my year of my year of Brian Eno project, where I'm reading his diary from 1995 called A Year of Swollen Appendices. If you want to know more about this series, then I suggest you watch the week 0 episode if you haven't done already. So we're up to the period covering the 5th to the 11th of February. And I'll go through as I usually do. We'll first of all look at things that piqued my interest that he mentions in the diary, which I wasn't already aware of, or reminded me of something that I was aware of at the time but I'd completely forgotten. And then once I've done that, I just go through a few things that happened in parallel in 1995, not necessarily mentioned in the diary, but just that was going on. And then finally I'll talk a little bit about lists that I've updated as well. So let's start off with this. In the diary there's a mention of, well, he uses the term clock museum, and initially I thought he was referring to, there's a specific part of the science museum which I probably have mentioned in another one of my episodes on something that spoke about the science museum. Actually, I was talking about the area around where the RCA is, I think, in last week's episode. Now I've thought about it. Anyway, I mentioned within there's an area to do with clocks and timepieces, and I thought maybe it was specifically about that, but what it was more about, and in the diary it references an essay in the appendices at the back of the diary, back of the book, and it was around this sort of thing. The clock of the long now is an example of it. So a mechanical clock under construction that is designed to keep time for 10,000 years. It is built by the Long Now Foundation. It's a 2-metre prototype, is on display at the Science Museum in London as of June 2018. 2 more prototypes are on display at the Long Now Museum and store at Font Mason Center in San Francisco. Project was conceived in 1986. So, from what I remember, and of course I read the essay, the article in the back of the appendices probably about a week ago, so I've forgotten the exact contents, but it was, I suppose, reflecting on this whole idea of thinking in very long time frames. And you can see here, it's interesting, the design here. It says, I want to build a clock that ticks once a year. The century hand advances once every 100 years, and the cuckoo comes out on the millennium. I want the cuckoo to come out every millennium for the next 10,000 years. If I hurry, I should finish the clock in time to see the cuckoo come out for the first time. Stanley Hillis, The Millennium Clock, Wild Scenarios from 1995. And so I'll include a link to this article. It's a really interesting thing to just muse and reflect on this idea of, very long-term time frame clocks, as opposed to the sort of clocks and timepieces and watches and whatever that we used to referring to day in, day out. Oh, there we go, see. Brian Eno, the clock of the long now, its name, and coined the term long now in an essay. He's collaborated Hillis on the writing and music for the chimes for a future prototype. I'm trying to think whether that was... So this refers to, I believe here, a later essay, not the one specifically in the book A Year of Swollen Appendices. Something else that was mentioned in the diary, which I subsequently read about, because I'm not so familiar with a lot of these art organisations or art-based organisations, and that was the London International Festival of Theatre, LIFT. It's a biennial festival of theatre performance and cultural events. So that was mentioned in the diary, and I'll include a link to that. And a couple of books, Being Digital, which was a non-fiction book about digital technologies and their possible future by technology author Nicholas Negroponte, originally published in January 1995, so he must have read it just as it came out. Not a book I've read, but it's definitely looks interesting, and I'm getting a bit of fascination. I've been listening to a podcast recently about programming languages, and the podcast started up in 2011, and at the start of the podcast they do a sort of review of the week in tech, or roughly a couple of weeks when the podcast comes out. And it's really interesting to see the sort of things that they were talking about, being the podcast started in 2011, and then thinking of reflecting on what actually happened. Now, as I've said, that their podcast is about programming, but they just spend the first almost half of the podcast just reflecting on what happened that week outside of the programming language they talking about, which in the first episode is C. It's always fascinating to read these future-faced digital technology books and just see how things panned out. So I definitely have a bit of a deeper dig beyond this article and maybe see how much a copy of this is to purchase. Maybe I can pick up a second-hand copy as well. Another book that he mentions is, well, I think he mentions the author, and he's talking about Turkish carpets. So I'm assuming it's this book. This came out a couple of years earlier, 93. And I was aware of a discussion at the time about the design of carpets. Or at some point, I remember watching something on the news about an interest in, and it might tie in with this, I'm not sure. But the author is a carpet scholar, I'm assuming here, because it says this book makes an important contribution to the world of carpet scholarship. It contains the first coherent theory of structure of carpet designs and contains much material that anticipates Alexander's general theory of order, which appears in The Nature of Order. So very interesting. In fact, I wonder if... Oh no, he said, so he's a collector. And then it looks like... Did he... apply some of his other stuff to this? So he's an architect. Okay. In computer science. So yeah, this is definitely a guy I should read more about. There it is. There we go. It'd be interesting, as I've said before, whether Brian Eno revisits this particular author later in the diary. So yeah, I'll include a link. What I'll do then is I'll include a link to this Wikipedia article. So those are the main things from reading this week, which I started to either went down rabbit holes or, in the case of this one, started to. I need to dig a little bit further. I've been a bit, I wouldn't say bogged down because it was enjoyable, but I've been revisiting programming languages this week, and I've been thinking seriously about getting back to doing some episodes about programming languages. I touch on them occasionally through, reflecting on certain books that spark joy, and I did dabble a little bit in doing a series about Rust, although it did peter out a little bit because the response on that wasn't sort of great. And I'm teetering on doing some things on other languages, just a sort of, I suppose, a basic top-down introduction, maybe how to do things like how to set up to learn a particular language in terms of resources, and just piquing people's interest. So let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in me doing, and if it is, what particular languages you would like me to cover. At the moment I'm focusing on, I think, a choice from around the 40 something programming languages that are mentioned in the most recent Stack Overflow survey. So that would be the 2022 one, and sort of working out from there. So I've been assembling a spreadsheet from that. But yeah, let me know in the comments section if that's something you're interested in me pursuing. So back to this, what this episode is really about. So in parallel, as I mentioned before, I'm going through and just looking at 1995 generally alongside the diary, and see unrelated stuff that's not necessarily related to what Brian Eno is involved with, but happened around the same time frame. And I notice here, and he doesn't mention it at all, there's a pilot episode of the Mrs. Merton show. So this became a bit of an institution in the UK. It was a mock talk show starring the comedian Caroline Aherne as this elderly host. So she played the character of this elderly host called Mrs. Dorothy Merton. And yeah, I remember this being super popular in its run. Let me just see how long this ran for. So 4 series, 29 episodes. And there we go. So yeah, from 93. Oh, there was a pilot done. So this was the first actual full episode on the 10th of February 95. And these are obviously the guests that she had, and interviewed them in this persona of Mrs. Merton. Well, definitely worth checking out. I'm sure there must be episodes that have been uploaded to YouTube. It's been repeated on the BBC numerous times. That's why I always think it probably ran longer than it actually did. It looks like it was on for 3 years. And Caroline Aherne was married to Hookie from New Order, I believe, at some point. She sadly passed away in 2016. Yeah, 94 until 1997. And then moving on to some films that came out around the period I've been reading this week that the diary covers. So that's from the 5th to the 11th of February. Now I do remember 2 of these. The Quick and the Dead, which is a revisionist Western film, and Shallow Grave, which was a black comedy. Didn't see either of these, but I remember seeing interviews on TV with the actors. This has a young Ewan McGregor in it. And I wonder if this was before he did... Let's have a look. So I'm trying to place it on a timeline here. Yeah, so it was before Trainspotting. So yeah, this is one of his early films. So 94, I wonder why. Obviously there must have been a... I don't know if there's a change in the release schedule. Maybe it was released slightly later in certain regions. And in music-wise, we have this fantastic album, Pygmalion by Slowdive, very ambient, and Mobile Safari by the Pastels. They're two bands I'm aware of this period. Both of these albums I didn't listen to at the time. This one, yeah, subsequently I've listened to. I just lost count now. I went on a bit of a Slowdive jag round about the late 2000s and bought all of their albums on CD, like the first 3 albums. Not that I haven't bought the most recent one that they released sometime I think in the 2010s. But yeah, I really got into shoegaze in a deeper sense a lot later on. I was aware of bands like Lush at the time, but didn't really explore the genre beyond that. But yeah, this is definitely... Well, I love all the first 3 Slowdive albums, but this is a great one to sit and listen to on a lazy afternoon and just doze off to. In terms of the charts around that time, so the singles charts, this is what the top 10 looked like. Entrance and M People, and well, Celine Dion, I suppose. Celine Dion is who I remember most. Top 20, what have we got? R. Kelly. Our Basket Case by Green Day. And this is interesting. I just want to mention this briefly. It's got no connection with the Brian Eno diary, but this is part of a tradition I've noticed in the UK, and I don't know if people get it a lot in other regions in the world, but of certain actors also there's a lot of actors who are excellent singers, but actors who sing theme tunes on their own TV shows. I think I first became aware of it way back in the 70s, 70s into the 80s, when there was a program on UK TV called Minder. And I'm trying to remember the name of the actor that actually played the Minder that it refers to in the series. And he sung on the sort of theme tune. I think the track was I Will Be So Good For You. Anyway, Jimmy Nail is another actor who was in a number of different films, a number of different TV series, including, I think was it Boys from the Black Stuff? Anyway, there was a later series in 95 where I'm pretty sure he sung the theme tune for, I think it was called Crocodile Shoes, the series, and that was the theme tune. Anyway, he ended up releasing an album off the back of that with a number of other songs he'd written and sung on. So yeah, that's a bit of a thing in the UK. TV actors that sing on their own theme tunes. Still got Human League in the charts. I've put the three in here, I think I mentioned it on previous weeks. I have a Spotify playlist where it just consists of all the new entries in the UK charts for the top 20 singles for 1995, and I'm building it as I go along. Oh, there's a Suede single just out the chart there as well. Albums wise, new entry by Left Field, new entry by Simple Minds. That came up on a previous episode here when we were looking at the albums that had just been released, so they've got in the charts. Got Dummy by Portishead in the charts. There's the Crocodile Shoes album, related to the TV series. And People, Eternal, Extreme was still going strong in terms of albums. Oh yeah, panpipes were a thing at the time as well. Blur, Park Life, Oasis, Green Day, Cranberries, yeah. I think a lot of these I've mentioned already in the album releases for the year. And so what I've done accordingly with my two other Spotify lists is I've updated it for what I've been listening to this week for Brian Eno related material. Not so much this week. I just listened to actually 3 albums here. The John Cale album and again, these aren't following through. These are just going through chronologically from when Brian Eno first started being involved in music. So I think by now I'm up to about, let me just consult my list here. We're in the 1989, 1990 period. So the John Cale album he was involved with, a Zuki Mu album, and a collaboration with John Cale. So the John Cale album here is one I think he produced. The one here is a collaboration with him and John Cale, and then this is an album he produced as well, from what I remember. I've added on to the bottom of the 95 releases that are unrelated to Brian Eno, although at some point outside by David Bowie, which should appear. I've added in the Pastels, Mobile Safari and Slow Dive's Pygmalion. Nothing's been added to either of my YouTube lists at the moment. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.